Today we're going to be looking at work-life balance and its impact upon culture. We'll be hearing from our Senior VP of Consulting and Subject Matter Expert, Norm Bailey-David, as he takes us through this topic. My name is Monica Helgoth. I'm the VP of Western Business at TalentMap, and I will be hosting today's session. Just before we get started, we're going to take a look at the agenda. So we'll spend about 5 minutes introducing the topic and exploring why this is important. We'll spend another 10 looking at the role of work-life balance in employee engagement. We'll spend a further 10 minutes just exploring work-life balance. Whose problem is it? And then we'll spend 5 minutes covering off if your organization suffers from cultural work-life imbalance, what to do about it. And then we'll take a look at some of the steps that you can take, practical steps to improve your work-life balance culture. From a housekeeping perspective, if you do have questions, feel free to use the right-hand sidebar to enter in your questions. We will be reserving about 10 minutes after the session to review all of the questions and hopefully provide you with the answers that you're seeking. Just for the uninitiated and those not familiar with TalentMap, I just want to cover off a couple of slides about who we are and what we do. So we've been in business for well over 15 years now, and our sole focus is on workplace measurement. We've done thousands and thousands of employee surveys since inception. It covers the gamut from engagement to onboarding and exit surveys, safety culture, 360 leadership, and so on. And we literally work with hundreds of different organizations across various industry sectors. I'll just wait for the next slide to proceed, and we'll just take a look at some of those sectors that we do work in. So we work with a lot of knowledge-based firms in technology and engineering. We work in the government sector across all orders of government and not-for-profit, health services, financial services, industry, includes manufacturing and oil and gas, and then, of course, other organizations as well, like colleges and universities and retail. So it's now time just to turn the mic over to Norm, and let's hear about work-life balance. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Monica. Good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are in this fine continent. Work-life balance, it's something that's, as you can probably tell from the title, near and dear to my own heart, because I am personally a self-confessed workaholic, and I am guilty of a lot of the bad stuff I'm going to tell you about today, and hopefully I'm going to use that experience plus the research, of course, that we've conducted here at TalentMap to give you some insight in terms of how we can address this issue, which I've been in business for more than 30 years, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. As a matter of fact, it looks like there's certain pressures that are even accentuating, and I'll talk about that. And of course, with those pressures, you're probably thinking technology, and yes, I will spend a little bit of time on the issue of technology. So the first thing, obviously, we're taking a look at this from the employee engagement angle. And I think it's very important to understand as I get into this that there's several perspectives around work-life balance. Employee engagement is only one of those perspectives. And I think as we show you the research in terms of the links between work-life balance and employee engagement, it's those other perspectives that are going to take on as much, if not greater, importance in terms of how we want to deal with it or how we need to deal with this as organizations. So the first thing, and the first misnomer, I mean, when you do a lot of reading in terms of work-life balance and employee engagement, authors are very, very quick to draw a link and infer that work-life balance is actually, or better work-life balance improves employee engagement. And I hate to tell you this, but in all of the research that we've done, we're actually seeing that the link between engagement and work-life balance is tenuous at best. And what I mean by that is that in our highest engaged organizations, what we have here is a slide of one of our highest performing organizations in the country, in Canada. What we see here is symptomatic of a lot of very high-performing, high-engaged organizations that we deal with. And that's work-life balance tends to be a casualty of that high engagement. It doesn't tend to be necessarily a driver. In other words, if people are feeling better about their work-life balance, they're not any more or less likely to be engaged than if they're not feeling good about their work-life balance. And when you think about this, it makes a lot of sense. Because when we peel the onion back on this link between work-life balance and employee engagement, we see that if you understand, first of all, the definition of what employee engagement is and what are the behaviors that result. If I can deviate ever so briefly, one of the key behaviors of engaged employees is that they go above and beyond. So if you think about someone who's going above and beyond, well, those people are going to be putting in extra effort. That's discretionary effort. That's a key behavioral outcome of someone who's engaged. Well, if somebody's putting in a lot of effort, a lot more effort, they tend to, some of them at least, tend to suffer on the work-life balance side. And in this particular slide, we're seeing that although overall work-life balance in this organization is still very good, and I can tell you, even though the numbers aren't there, it's a lot better than average at 72% favorable. You still see in this very highly engaged organization that work-life balance is one of the bottom, on the bottom rung. It's almost 30% of people who are questioning their work-life balance in this very highly engaged organization. And it also goes to show that it's a lot of those people who are questioning their work-life balance are already engaged. So improving the work-life balance, at least for this particular organization, or for very highly engaged organizations, work-life balance is not going to be a ticket to higher engagement. And that can be problematic. Because when we look at another, this is from another very highly engaged organization, not the same one that I showed you, but a very, very similar approach, is when we show our clients and we point them in the direction of the things that need improvement, those are the things, the dimensions that tend to be on the right-hand side of this chart. So these strong engagement drivers here. We're often seeing that work-life balance, even though it's not necessarily well perceived, and in some cases actually worse than average, it tends to be over here on this left-hand side. And when it's on that left-hand side, we are guilty of calling that a medium or low priority from an employee engagement perspective. So we're guilty even of giving management or giving organizations sort of a ticket out in terms of the work-life balance issue. Of course, that's not our intent at all. And when I do the presentations to our clients, I often stress that work-life balance, if it is in a position that's very similar to this client, I would say, yes, if you want to improve employee engagement, you need to work on professional growth, you need to work on compensation, you need to work on innovation. But work-life balance, obviously, here is an issue in this organization. And though it's some of the highly engaged employees that are causing this work-life balance issue, or that are suffering, I shouldn't say they're causing it, they're suffering work-life balance issue, failure to act on that work-life balance will have other consequences. And that's where the other perspectives that I referred to before take hold. Health and wellness, mental health, productivity. All of these other things will suffer and do suffer if work-life balance is out of kilter, as is the case in this organization. But from a purely employee engagement perspective, often we're finding that it's the engaged employees that are having the most issue with work-life balance, not the disengaged one. So when we're talking about work-life balance in the employee engagement context, what are we talking about exactly? Well, we measure, when we're looking at work-life balance as a dimension within employee engagement, you measure it against these 5 statements here that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. So is the actual workload or the volume of work appropriate or reasonable in the mind or the eye of the employee? Are they able or do they feel able to maintain that balance between work and home? How much stress is in the job? And really the key ones are the bottom. Do people have a sense of control over the workload? And do they often feel compelled to work outside of the office during evenings, weekends, vacation, etc.? And you see for this particular organization, again, a different organization than the other two that I showed you before, they have a particular issue around this. Now, what's really key here is at no point are we asking about number of hours worked. Work-life balance is a very personal thing. I'm sure you will agree that someone can work 70 hours a week and still maintain a healthy work-life balance for their individual situation. Others can work 40 hours a week and be straining to maintain a work-life balance. So this is not dependent on hours worked. And I think that's very important to understand when it comes to enacting the policies that are going to help us. And I'm going to talk about the policy framework a little bit later on in my presentation. But when we're looking at work-life balance from the employee engagement perspective and also from the individual's perspective, it bears a little resemblance to the actual number of hours worked. And we tend to overreact in terms of measuring work-life balance on a per hour or hours worked basis, and not in terms of a psychological or feeling or locus of control basis that really is what determines the work-life balance for any particular individual. So whose problem is it anyway? And there's a lot of debate around this. First of all, I'm one of the, previously at least in a former life, I was one of those very, very guilty that I would basically come out and say in a webinar presentation like this that work-life balance was the individual's issue. For the reasons more or less that I just explained, it's because it's such an individually determined issue, then we tend to sort of fluff it off, or many of us tend to sort of equate that with the individual's issue, and it's up to the individual then to control their own balance and to assert themselves and to assert their own balance within between life and work in the organization. And you know what? I have to sort of defend those who have that perspective, because over the years, that's basically what's been ingrained. And when we have leaders, opinion leaders like Jack Welch, formerly of GE, say things like there's no such thing as work-life balance, they're choices, you make them, they have consequences, that's putting the onus on the individual. Some people might think that's unfair. Other people might think that's completely appropriate. And depending on the organization or your organization's cultural lens, you may or may not agree with that statement. However, what it does is indisputably put work-life balance and the achievement of work-life balance at the hand or in the onus of the individual. Whether or not that's the case or that's true, let's explore that a little bit more. I said I would talk about technology, and there's a very, very good study that's quoted here at the bottom from the ACM. And what that study does is it looked at the different stresses around technology. I'm not going to go into this in particular. If you read the paper, it's not very long at all, and if you want it, I can actually send it to you. You can contact me at the contact information I'll provide at the end of the webinar. But what it does is it isolates 5 different areas where technology may have nefarious effects on the individual, not only in terms of work-life balance. There's one in particular of the 5, and you see it circled here. There's 5 conditions that create what we call techno stress. But only one of those really equates with work-life balance and work culture, and that's called techno invasion. And what is techno invasion? This is a situation where professionals can potentially be reached anywhere, anytime, and feel the need to be constantly connected. Now, why am I talking about this immediately following talking about the onus of the individual and work-life balance? And that's because oftentimes what the technology is doing is it's essentially creating feelings amongst individuals and creating a compulsiveness about being connected, so that they feel either forced to respond to work-related information, or they get created or trapped in this habitual multitasking. So they actually spend very, very little time on sustained tasks, sustained think tasks. And I think what's important about this, and why we tend to think that work-life balance, especially with the emergence of technology, is an individual's issue. We can be completely understandable. It can be understood why many people think that way, because we can observe very, very many people who voluntarily, or at least it looks like it's voluntarily, that are completely. We've all seen the BlackBerry prayer, the addicts, the people who take computers and laptops and electronic devices on vacation with them. I saw it at the beach not long ago. I mean, we look at those folks and we say that, well, they're the ones that have the issue. It's not the company's problem. Well, in actual fact, what we're looking at is the technology that's creating that compulsion, and it's essentially one of the side effects, if you will, of this techno stress. More importantly, what it actually is doing is also it's creating a sense of importance of the individual. So as this, one of the side effects of the sense of compulsion is that people, if we do the wrong thing essentially and just yank the device away, which is some policy responses to that, we're actually taking away people's sense of importance. So the compulsion becomes, or is as a result of, if I'm constantly on and constantly in touch, if I lose that touch, feel less important to the organization. And these are some of the root causes of the individual's compulsion that need to be addressed going forward. It's not just a question of looking at what the organization can or cannot do. We have very, very innate or strong individual compulsions that we have to deal with in terms of work-life balance. So on this particular note, there was a very, very interesting experiment that was conducted not too long ago, just under 2 years ago. It's published in the American Sociological Review that you can see in the footnote below. And what this study did, it was done by the National Health Institutes of Health Centers of Disease Control. You're probably aware of that, based in Atlanta. And it took 700 professionals in very, very high-skilled tech workers. And it divided them into two groups. Now, all of the 700 reported working long hours. And by long hours, they meant more than 50 hours a week. Some of those already worked remotely. They worked from home, but they also indicated that they had some pressure to be visible at the office. So then they divided that 700 into two groups. So one of those groups was called the treatment group. The other group was the control group. So the treatment group, using hand-picked managers, essentially were provided a greater control over when and where they worked. And then supervisors that they reported to in this experiment, which took over 6 months, essentially the supervisors provided more explicit support for their family, for their personal lives. In the control group, essentially their conditions remained unchanged. And you can probably guess the results of this particular experiment. So over the 6-month period, there was a significant reduction in work-family conflict, which basically means what is that chronic sense of being pulled in two different directions. That's what they call a work-family conflict in this. Those who were parents reported working a single hour less per week, only 1 hour less a week than non-parents. And then I think very importantly, one of the misnomers or myths around work-life balance and workloads is that other workers, single workers, unattached workers, those without families or kids, often are making sacrifices or are increasing their own workloads to accommodate parents who have greater family demands. Well, this experiment actually debunked that myth. It was other workers did not increase their workloads to accommodate the parents. And the treatment group felt that they reported they had now had more adequate time to spend with families. So overall, they felt more in control, less overwhelmed. So if you remember those 5 statements we used to measure engagement, work-life balance and engagement, I have control over my workload. This particular one here, just in terms of this experiment, people felt more in control. So there's no surprise that when we have a supportive working environment, we're going to have an increased or improved work-life balance. However, the key here is this is for the first time. This is an evidence-based randomized trial study that shows that the workplace, so if we're in HR, or we're leaders in our workplaces, we can improve employee work-life balance. It's not just a question of the individual asserting themselves. We can have effect. So the remainder of the presentation really is going to be around how can we do that. So first of all, why would we want to do that? Well, obviously the benefits, I'm preaching to the converted here. Everybody knows, I think, what the benefits of an improved work-life balance are for the individual. They're stated here on the screen. However, what about productivity? I mean, so there's obviously a myth that circulates that productivity is going to, if we allow people to work fewer hours or more flexible hours, then our productivity is going to decrease. People will work less. I think that's really the key here. If we get really serious about work-life balance, people will work less. Well, first of all, in our experiment, our treatment group almost doubled the average hours of work at home. So the people now given the flexibility to do so, they moved from almost 10 hours to almost 20 hours a week working at home. You'll notice that wasn't more than that. So there's still a substantial amount of office time, which provided for that face-to-face collaboration. That working from home, it's often feared that we'll lose that. Well, in this particular experiment, it didn't go away entirely because individuals, obviously professionals, felt that that was important as well. And also the adjustments, there was adjustments in this management thinking about where and when work gets done. And that led to system-wide flexibility, so a lot less pressure, without burdening those who work on a more conventional places and without placing the onus on the individual workers to assert themselves. But most importantly, I think before I move on, is that there was no reduction or significant reduction in the total number of hours worked. So that's really key. We're talking about professionals who work roughly around 50 or more hours per week. They shifted how and when they worked, but they didn't shift how much they worked. Yet they still achieved a greater level of control over the workplace, hence a sense of work-life balance. So that's really key to understanding that this is not about hours, it's not about workload, it's all about control. It's all about support. So that's really how we need to start looking at this, and I'm going to get more concrete and more detailed as we move through the following slides. So a lot of what we're talking about then is if the individual can only control so much of their own work-life balance, then we have to look at what are we doing as an organization to promote work-life balance, or actually probably more aptly, what are we doing to prohibit work-life balance? And one of the things that's cited again and again and again in articles, and one of the things you may be noticing if you already have a lot of work-life balance policies in place, is that work-life balance tends to not be increasing or improving. Even though we might have very, very good wellness programs in place, even though we might have technology programs in place or meeting programs in place, and the reasons why it's not improving is because individuals are not necessarily taking advantage of those. And when we find out, when we peel the onion back to understand why individuals aren't taking advantage of those policies, programs, procedures that are actually meant to improve work-life balance, we find out that really the key barrier is culture. And so what we need to look at is our organization suffering from that cultural work-life imbalance? And if it is, what can we do about it? So this is really where, this is my favorite part of my talk with you today, because I was the guilty one. I was the one at one point in my life, a long time ago, thank God, that I was saying a lot of these things. And now the research is bearing this out in terms of, these are the symptoms of a culture of a work-life balance that's, or sort of culture of a work-life balance that's in imbalance. And the first thing, and a lot of you are going to recognize these things if you're working in those types of cultures. If you're working in a very, very healthy culture, then this is going to seem very, very foreign to you. And that's actually a good thing. But the first thing we need to look at is face time. And not essential, when we're talking about face time, what I'm talking about is equating presence with productivity and output. And I was actually at a client just last week where this is actually the case. And oddly enough, this client puts a very high values-driven client, is putting a lot of value in terms of sustainability and people and things like that. Yet, peers and supervisors equate presence with productivity and output. In other words, if I don't see you, I don't think you're working. And that was me. That was definitely me at one point in time. I just couldn't get my head wrapped around the fact that if somebody wasn't in the office, that they weren't actually productive. And of course, over time, that changes. And what changes? I can tell you what changes. What changes is the output or the results or the product coming from that individual are as good, if not better, when we see less of them than when we see them more. And really, as we get to the policy framework, it's going to be really around looking at performance from a productivity, output, and quality standpoint as opposed to an hour's work standpoint. So basically, that's in terms of a culture that's unhealthy. You often see things or hear things that really judge performance based on quantity, not quality. And you'll hear things in the office like, oh, he's great, he's always here late, she's real responsive, she'll answer an email day or night, he's not a team player, he always leaves before 6 o'clock. And just these offhand, subtle, somewhat snide comments are really a key. They're your ticket that we've got something wrong in terms of our culture. Meetings or calls at odd hours. Essentially, someone will call a meeting at 7 a.m. Well, because it shows, you can do this because you're committed to the organization. You're a team player. You'll see this. Lack of consideration for others' time is another cultural issue. The last-minute Friday afternoon requests. Absolutely need this by Monday morning. And one of my favorites, and I still see this very often, and when I walk into an organization or a client, it's this particular one that I can basically see that this organization has an issue with culture, and that's the meeting culture. And you come into a meeting promptly at, let's say, 12:30 or 10:30, and the meetings never start on time. And why? Because everybody's they look harried, they rush in, and they're never on time. And why? It was because when you ask them, well, if I was here first, I'm going to be perceived by my peers as not busy enough. And the senior person always is the one who arrives at the end. All to communicate to others that I am the busiest one of all. It becomes that sort of one-upmanship in the culture. Lower productivity and procrastination. Well, I'm going to be here till 8 o'clock anyway. I'll get it done later. That was one of my things. And of course, what's happening is you're actually stretching because you've got these other pressures around face time and visibility. You're actually stretching the same workload over a longer time period. So you're not doing any more work. You're just doing it later for the optics. And of course, you ask any individual, they're going to deny this. They don't even realize that they're doing it, but this is actually what's going on. Self-preservation. You'll often hear deflection of tasks, avoiding accountability, but yet sort of making the appearance that they are busy enough. I'm already overloaded this weekend. Sorry, can't help you. Type of comments. Of course, they may or may not be working on the weekend. Hopefully they're not. But the fact that they need this as an excuse to avoid that particular task is a real key here that we've got an issue around culture. And of course, my favorite here, the badge of honor. The badge of honor is essentially wearing that work-life balance or lack thereof as a sense of self-importance. Oh my God, and anybody asking, how are you? I'm so busy. I'm so busy. I'm busy all the time. We're slammed. We're this. We're that. Or in the meeting, the quintessential, yes, I'll look at this over the weekend. Well, they're not going to look at it over the weekend, but it's posturing. You know it's posturing. But the fact that they feel that they have to say these things is endemic of the culture that I'm talking about. Or it's just part of and you can name your business, and everybody thinks their business is that special business. It's part of, it's just part of law. It's just part of advertising. It's just part of marketing. It's just part of working at a consumer packaged goods company. It's just part of tech. Everybody's business can be slotted in there. It's just part of working with this department of government. Yes, I said government. That's the type of attitude. And of course, the badge of honor, the divorces and things like that. essentially all of those things. So while I'm continuing the talk, I wouldn't mind if you just enter, some of those things that you've seen. Enter those into the chat section or the questions section. And if we have time in a few minutes, I wouldn't mind taking a look and picking out some of the juicy ones. But all to say that you can very, very easily ascertain if this is your organization or not. And of course, it's very, very subtle, but it's also very, very endemic. And I can tell you, not only based on the research, but of course based on my own experience, that these are the telltale signs of an organization that's in imbalance. Of course, here I just picked this one off LinkedIn. I was on my LinkedIn this morning, and I saw a recruiting ad for a tech firm, and this was the picture that was associated with it. So you can just see, you know what? I'm hoping that people are going to look at this and say, "No way, Jose, I'm never going to go work there." That's really one of the solutions long term. But there's other ones that I'm going to talk to you about today in terms of how we fix this. So what do we do about this? So let's say we've got a work-life balance culture that's upside down. We have a lot of this stuff that's happening that I just showed you about. You can recognize it. You know it's happening. It's coming right from the top. What do we do? Well, first of all, obviously, just like any other culture change, it has to be accepted and changed at the top. But what I think is going to be different is how we go about it. But first of all, let me show you what it looks like in terms of, so what does a positive work-life balance culture look like? And this comes from a number of different studies, and I can cite those if you wish and if you ask for. But some of the organizational traits that are mentioned in a culture or a positive work-life balance culture: fun, ambition, you can read the list there, flexibility, etc. Interestingly enough, when we look at our engaged attitudes, so the attitudes that are that people who are engaged hold, it's the same ones. They're very, very, very similar, as you can see those in bold. So what are the management actions then that are different, that are creating that positive work-life balance culture? And you'll notice that these aren't necessarily specific to work-life balance. These are the same attributes of good leadership and good management writ large. Their understanding of employees' needs and concerns. They make themselves available to employees. They're supportive. They demonstrate trust. They give employees feedback. Well, I could take that list and I can put it on any, what's a good leader type of list. It's not necessarily different. But the keys here, I think, given the experiment that I talked about before, are the supportiveness and the understanding of the employees' needs and concerns. So let's get into those steps, 3 of them. Now, you might think that I might say, well, we need to change the leader's mindset first. And that's true only to the extent that the leader supports the policy changes that we're talking about. Increasingly, in the study of behavior and heuristics, what we're seeing is that behavior needs to precede attitude. And it's only positive reinforcement of behavior that basically changes behavior long term. It's very, very difficult to change someone's attitude about something, and then that will lead to a change in behavior. So what we can do, and what we can do, and what we can start doing, this list here on the policy framework comes from SIOP, comes from the Society for Organizational and Industrial Psychology. And we look at sort of 4 policy areas. Sort of, first of all, the work hours and job design. The restricted hours, minimal work required during off hours. We can set guidelines and policy around that. But as I'm going to say, we need to be careful that what we're doing in our policy framework is encouraging people who want a better work-life balance to have the supportive environment to do so, not necessarily standardizing people's work habits. I think that's a very, very important nuance or distinction to make. So the second thing is the culture. Now, what I'm talking about in terms of culture are just things to minimize negative norms, because we're not going to change culture through policy. But what we're doing through the policy framework is we're establishing a supportive environment that's going to facilitate the latter change in culture. So we can minimize negative norms, such as we can say no one leaves, and if if there's a habit of people leaving late and only people leaving because their boss is not leaving, we can basically institute things that, eliminate norms such as no one leaves until, or no, I've seen another one where there's no internal meetings after 4:30, things like that. And these are guidelines. Again, they're not necessarily hard and fast policy, because that would be a little bit too restrictive. Provide incentives which encourage balancing work and non-work domains. So things like use it or lose it vacation, as opposed to being able to bank a lot of vacation. Incentives for not claiming sick or personal days. I see that in a lot of companies still that have incentives for not being absent for sick or personal days. And of course, what's that going to do? Is that, that's going to create the incentive not to use those days or not to create the work balance. We want to take. We don't want to necessarily put in disincentives, but we don't want to create incentives for bad work-life balance. And of course, we need enablement, because as much as I said we can control workload, we have, in many of our organizations, we have external pressures, clients, customers, demands from the outside that are, and this is tends to be what causes that reaction in terms of, this is our business. Well, everybody's got these pressures. Every private sector organization has customers. Every public sector organization has citizens and stakeholders that need to be served and are demanding. So how do we deal with that and provide work-life balance? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. Surge capacity is one. If we plan for surge capacity, what I mean by surge capacity is when you get that rush, when you get that last-minute thing, that you know who and when to call on in order to mitigate that, where you're not calling on the same people again and again. Sometimes that's internal. Sometimes that is overtime. That's okay. As long as if it's properly planned and people have control over that, then you don't have the same work-life balance issues than if it's it's a surprise. And the other thing with surge capacity, it's just that, it's surge. Once it becomes part of normality, then we also have the issue that remains endemic. So we need to enable our employees as well to manage greater workloads. Flexible work and telecommuting is the most often cited policy right now, but it's also quite problematic, because what I'm seeing is organizations and our client organizations are implementing this, but they're not implementing it on a consistent basis. Basically saying, well, some jobs can do it, other jobs can't do it. That may or may not be true, but what we have to make sure of is any perceived inequity is going to be a source of strife. So we have to make sure that there's a very, very strong sense of equity and fairness in any policy around flexible work and telecommuting. One of the observations I'll make, anybody who's in the GTA today will probably agree, this is becoming a must. This is becoming, in our exit surveys, an increasing reason for leaving an organization is because they either can't work from home, can't telecommute, or the commute is getting so obscene that it's becoming a reason to leave. So it's becoming a very, very hot button issue in the GTA. Wellness and benefits, we've all heard of these things. There's provisions. We can do all this, but the thing is, as I said before, all of these policies and programs are only the first step, because what we're going to see is many of our work-life balance offenders, many of those people who don't have good work-life balance, won't feel yet that they could take advantage of these things because of the culture. So we're going to get to that in a second. The other thing that we need to keep as a proviso here is the policy framework needs to provide opportunities for those who want to improve, set a positive example to others, but not enforce standard work habits. We can't have a punch clock mentality that says, nobody should be here before 9 and nobody should leave after 5. That doesn't work for people. Individuals are going to create their own balance. As we saw with our experiment, people don't necessarily work fewer hours, but what they do is they adopt greater control of those hours and work those hours and institute that drive and engagement for the organization in their own flexible way, as opposed to a rigid organizational way. So the next thing to do is we need to address the technology challenge. And Google is doing something very, very interesting on this. Now there's a number of studies, Google did one of them, that divides technology challenges, or divides it into two typologies, or two types of people. There's segmenters and there's integrators. Segmenters are people like myself, as a matter of fact, who are able to very, very cleanly separate work and personal. So essentially, when I go home at night now, I've learned of my own volition that I won't check email until the following morning. On the weekend, I won't check email unless, except for during a period when on a Sunday morning, but it's all under my control. But you also have integrators, and integrators are those people who bounce back and forth. Work is always in the background. They're checking email, then they're going on Facebook, they're doing it at home, they're integrating their work and their family life, and that's enabled by technology. And of course, they've got that compulsiveness. They feel that they're pressing the refresh button. Is there anything new? Is there anything new I got to respond to? And of course, this is what's creating the techno stress. But what's interesting is some of those folks, have a personal drive, and that's the way they want to work. They're very, very comfortable doing it that way. They feel in complete balance by being able to leave the office at 3 o'clock, yet work and check email after the kids have gone to bed at 8. Fine. But what we're also noticing in studies, and Google notices as well, is a large percentage of those who are integrators are actually trying to become segmenters. They want a degree of separation, but they can't do it on their own. They can't do it on their own because of A, of that compulsiveness, and B, the cultural pressures. So what Google did is they had a number of things to do. They had at their Dublin office when Dublin goes dark, essentially, where actually people handed in their phones. Not everybody, only people who wanted to, but it was a company policy that you could hand in your phone when you left the office at whatever time you left the office and pick it up when you came back. And the reports that came from that were extremely positive in terms of that sense of relief, that sense of control now. And of course, being company policy, the Dublin Goes Dark policy, supervisors knew that people were leaving their phones so they couldn't reach them at night and things like that. So it rippled through the organization, creating that sense of control. And charity fines. Of course, charity fines are, these are fun things that other organizations are doing as well. Google did it. Those responding to off-hour emails who held a separate leadership position were fined a quarter, $1, $5, whatever it is, all going to a separate charity. And of course, what that did essentially was that made people think more than anything else around how to manage technology and what to expect. Interestingly enough, Google only did it for those who were responding, not those who were sending. Why? Because when you're sending the message, and you're working on your own volition, you're balanced. If you feel you need to respond to the message, that's the symptom of the integrator. So they were very astute to this. And then, of course, what I've been alluding to all along here is addressing the culture. So how is it, how do we attack from an organizational perspective all of those badge of honor phenomena, all of those things that are going on in an organization that are rewarding poor work-life balance practices. The first thing is steps 1 and 2 already start to send signals that work-life balance is not it's not detrimental to productivity, and it's not bad for work ethic. It's the reverse. It's an enabler of work and employee engagement. It's an enabler of productivity. It's an enabler of profitability. So what we need to do here, essentially, take the following steps to address the root causes that I was talking about. First of all, we need to make sure that performance is based on output, deliverables, and quality. And any inference to performance based on physical presence, any links in terms of recognition for the people who work late and work long hours have to be done away with. It's fine to recognize people for an achievement, but if we recognize people because they worked long, hard, toiled, and we're often guilty of doing that. We need to delink any inference, any recognition to performance based on physical presence or based on how long we worked, and we need to implement those performance and recognition items to deliverables and quality. Again, recognize and reward performance for those individuals who are working at home or outside the office. Of course, if the achievement is there, that sends a clear signal to the organization that this is not bad behavior. This is good behavior. and it should be emulated. And of course, key here is leading by example. Be aware if you're in a leadership position, and I can speak to personal experience around it. You need to be aware how others are watching you. You need to know that people are watching what you do, how long you're in the office, and are making comments about it. So set the example. If you need to or feel comfortable for working at home after, you can do that. However, be aware that others are watching how long you're in the office. Be open about working outside the office on a regular basis. It's okay. It's a good thing. When you hear those badge of honor comments, devalue them. One of the things that I love to say when people come, in the quintessential meeting, yes, I'm going to go look at this over the weekend, I will basically say something like, well, that's too bad. That's too bad for you. You can wait till Monday morning to do it, and it'll be perfectly fine. And the first few times that you do that, you're going to, you get that feeling of shock. Well, wait a second, I'm willing to work on the weekend. How come I'm not getting that reward? And if you devalue these badge of honor comments, and the leadership devalues these badge of honor comments most of all, that's where the key is, then that's what's going to happen. Now, manage external pressures, negotiation of reasonable deadlines and pressure. One of the things a misnomer that I hear, I've referred to it already, and I hear it so much, is that we need to work these hours because of our client demands, because of our stakeholder demands. Well, I think the benefit of experience has shown me, at least, and everybody that I work with, that we can manage those deadlines. We can negotiate reasonable deadlines in 95% of the cases. That we can basically set a reasonable expectation with our clients in a mutually acceptable way. There's very, very few clients or organizations that are completely unreasonable in terms of their own deadlines. And when they are, then we can make a conscious decision to go above and beyond and improve that, really shine in the eyes of that client. But we're making that conscious decision on our own. If we don't manage those external pressures and we just react to them, then obviously our employees are going to basically think that we're throwing them to the wolves. And one of my own favorite tips is never, never, never arrange for a deadline or a deliverable on a Monday. Always do it on a Friday. And I think that speaks for itself. And I had an employee come up to me and says, well, why don't we just do it for Monday? That gives us 3 extra days. Well, I said, you're sentencing yourself to working on the weekend if you do that. So basically, I'm hoping that some of these things are giving you some insight in terms of how we deal with this. Now, I haven't gone to the questions yet, but I can anticipate one. And the one question I can anticipate is, well, what if it's our senior leadership that's the most egregious culprits in terms of the work-life balance? How do we address that? Well, the issue is, and I've been one of those senior leaders, I am one of those senior leaders. The issue is, it's fine, do it yourself, but don't impose that those work habits on others. And so it comes back to being aware and being self-aware of what you're doing and how that's impacting others. You need to basically do everything else that we talked about, but manage your own work-life balance accordingly. And I think this has worked. In the coaching that I've done for many managers, this tends to work. You do have very, very driven individuals that are going to continue to work 60 hours a week. But if they understand that work-life balance in general is better for productivity, is better for engagement, it's better for profitability, then they're going to be able to do all the other things on this list. So on that note, basically, keep at it. It's not going to change overnight, but what you will see is high employee morale. You notice I don't say engagement. Productivity will go up. You'll be able to recruit better candidates. Your engagement levels, if you're already high, might not go up because we're talking about the engaged individuals. One thing I can say is retention will increase as well when we address this issue. So on that note, I'm just going to turn it back over to Monica to talk about what are some of the upcoming things. And while she's doing that, I will take a peek at the questions to see. Hopefully, you've put some of the things. Oh, I see it's very, very full here. So I'm going to take this a little bit offline while Monica talks about those upcoming lessons.
Well, thanks so much for those insightful comments, Norm, and I'm sure each one of us can make some positive work-life balance adjustments. Just some of our learning sessions that are coming up. We have an HRPA event in Ottawa, Dine and Learn, where we'll be looking at engaging the millennial generation, separating fact from fiction. That occurs on March the 10th. HPRA Thunder Bay, we're doing a half-day workshop around engaging millennials in the workplace once again. That's March 15th. Do join us again for our monthly webinar series, and the next one coming up is on March 24th, where we're going to be looking at how to keep employees engaged in a troubled economy. Then we're at the OMHRA Spring Workshop. It's a conference and trade show on April 13th. From April 14th to 16th, we're going to be attending PSYOP, and on the 26th to the 27th, we'll be in BC at the conference and trade show for the HRMA, so do pop our booth. All right, Norm, have you weeded through some of those comments? And
we've got a lot here. We got a lot, some great badge of honor statements. I'll read a few of them for you so you can get a laugh, because we've all heard them. Here, I practically live here anyways. I forget what my kids look like. Yeah, I've used that one too. Don't remember the last time I took a lunch break, and of course, in the Eastern time zone, we're doing this from 12 to 1. So, you know, guilty as charged here. Hopefully, you'll take a break to grab a bite right after, or you did right, or even best is that you're doing it during what we're talking about today. So, a very interesting question here. Why do new younger workers stay within required hours and get everything done compared to older workers that have a different mindset? Very, very good question. It's something that we've looked into quite a bit, because we do a lot of work, and as you can see from the upcoming learning sessions, I'm doing a couple of sessions on the millennial generation coming up in early March. And one of the key observations of our millennial generations is they tend to be a lot more demanding and assertive around work-life balance. They're much more of them are essentially, I wouldn't say they're segmenters, and from the technology side, they actually tend to be integrators. But what they do is essentially they've got, they're very good at asserting the difference in their lives. So what they might do is they might say, yeah, I've got soccer practice, sorry, I can't stay and finish your thing. But what I've also seen happen is that right after soccer practice, while everybody else is having a beer, they're banging away at their phone. So this is one of the things that we don't see happening. And it's because we, in the older generation, are conditioned to that FaceTime mindset that we're assuming that because they're leaving on time that they're actually not working or thinking about work. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're actually more integrators than we give them credit for doing. So there's that's part of it, but they're also they've observed our generation, my generation, being the parents' generation, work crazy hours essentially, and have little to show for it in the fact that we're laid off and we're treated poorly, or some of us are treated poorly by large employers. So they say, you know, why would I do that? Why would I sacrifice my life? So they have a very much better rounded sense of self than the generation preceding. And of course, I'm generalizing a lot here, but that's some of our observations. So thank you for that question. Yes, for everybody who asked whether or not you're going to receive the slide deck will be put up on the website, and on the last slide here, which I'll show you there, you see the copy. You can, within a week or so, you'll have access to both the PowerPoint and the recording. I think it will also be posted in PDF for those of you who prefer PDF. So, you know, lots of no time to eat today. Lots of lunch break comments. Like I said before, I'm hoping I'm not the cause of that. I'm hoping you took a bite to eat while you listen to me go on here. So with that, I think that's pretty much it for today. We've come to the top of our hour as well. I want to thank you very, very much for your attention, and I hope that some of this is going to arm you in terms of improving your own work-life culture. So Monica, unless you have something to add, we'll sign off right here.
Thank you for joining us, folks.
Thank you very much, everybody.